Hey, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I am Alicia Marston. I am the Director of Aquatic Trade, which is in Strategy and Policy. And thanks for taking the time today to join me to go over the updates that are coming for our RAEF 2.0 program. We have 3 hours set aside. I don't think that we will take the whole time, but I wanted to make sure that there was plenty of time for questions at the end. And this training is also being recorded, and we'll post it internally for later reference or future training needs as well. So with that, I will go ahead and get started. All right, so we're going to start with just some introductions. Then we'll focus on the timeline and the new processes that you're going to be seeing with RAEF 2.0. Then we'll go into more detail about the actual inspection types, the documents, the particular workflows for each inspection type, and then just wrap up with a few additional resources and information. Okay, so to start, for those of you that haven't worked with us before, we have a new team that's called the Aquatic Trade Team. It's a subunit within live animals and animal products that focuses specifically on aquatic trade. So I'm the Director of Aquatic Trade, and we have our program analyst, Shaquita Whiting, and then we have 2 staff officers, Dr. Lauren Harris, who's on screen. She is our staff officer for aquatic animal export, and she's also the RAEF program manager. We will also be getting a new staff officer at the end of August this month, Dr. Siobhan Leonard, who will be covering aquatic animal imports. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the timeline and process. First, I want to start off with, why do we have RAEF? Why is this program in place, and why are we updating it? And so let's go over that a little bit first. So for the RAEF inspection program, RAEF stands for the Registered Aquaculture Export Facility Inspection Program. And this program is our APHIS mechanism for conducting aquatic animal facility inspections, and that have to meet some level of requirements in order to go to a certain country. So in the RAEF program is intended to document that the facility is under APHIS oversight, which is required by some of our trading partners, and also to document and verify that the facility meets country-specific requirements. So this is strictly a trade-related facility inspection that we're doing, and so that's why we're focusing on the country-specific requirements. There have been a lot of changes to the landscape for aquatic animal health and trade over the last 20 years, and so some of the things that I jotted down here are, we've seen changes in just the growing international awareness and guidance that's out there for aquatic animal health. For example, just in the last couple of years, we've seen new WOA-listed pathogens added. WOA has come out with their aquatic animal health strategy, which addresses aquatic animal health, biosecurity, as well as how all of that works within trade. And then also, specific discussions on antimicrobial use and antimicrobial resistance initiatives that we've seen out of WOA. Additionally, the FAO, which is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, they are in the final stages of publishing their guidelines for sustainable aquaculture, which include information about biosecurity and high health for aquatic animals that are being farmed, as well as their own initiatives for antimicrobial use and antimicrobial resistance. So those are some of our international standards that are at play, and changing our landscape, as well as, we've seen changes here in the U.S. We've seen, a lot of our aquaculture used to be very coastal focused, or, within lakes. And now with the new technologies that we have, we're seeing more and more aquaculture being land-based. It could be, a shrimp farm in Nevada. And so we're seeing those changes within our country. And then also as a result of that, we're having states that, are maybe increasing their own regulations for aquatic animals, or, this is the first time that they now have an aquaculture farming industry in their state. And so they're working to put together their own state requirements. So all of these changes have kind of been happening at the domestic level, at our international level, and within the countries of our trading partners as well. So therefore, RAEF has to evolve in order to both meet and maintain these international market access. So part of that is for our internal purposes. We are certifying export health certificates, endorsing export health certificates. And we need to, as those endorsing officials, we need to be able to verify certain things before we can sign the health certificate, including that the facility is under our oversight, that, we previously approved the facility, for, the species that they have, that they're meeting the requirements to send those species to the countries that require APHIS oversight, et cetera. And also so that when we have trading partners that require evaluations or questionnaires from the aquatic trade team about what are our processes for having oversight of our U.S. aquaculture facilities, or maybe they're even physically coming to the United States to conduct an audit of our systems and visit our facilities like they do with poultry and swine. We want to make sure that we have the documentation in place and we can give our trading partners that confidence that we have oversight of these facilities as the competent authority for aquatic animal health, and so that we can either open new markets or don't run the risk of, if that audit or evaluation doesn't go well, losing a market. So those are just kind of some of the reasons why you've seen some changes over the past couple of years. So before we talk about RAEF 2.0, I just want to talk a little bit more about the transition of the various versions that you've been seeing. So back in 2008, around 2008, was the first time that the RAEF program came out. There was a one-page inspection form. There were no country-specific requirements. And how that one-page form was actually being used in the field was very inconsistent as far as the inspection and approval process. So in 2020, we did a big update to the registration program. We had a 3-part inspection form. We were really making sure that we were documenting and verifying the facility met country-specific requirements. And we made a lot of changes to improve the consistency of the inspection and approval process. Now we're in, 3 years later, and there's definitely some improvements that can be made from the 2020 version. So that's where RAEF 2.0 comes. So we now have a pre-inspection package that the facility will fill out. We'll go into all of these pieces in much more detail in a little bit. But there's a pre-inspection form. There's an actual inspection checklist that focuses on the export requirements and then also on the facility requirements. We've made a lot of effort to streamline both the documentation and verification process of country-specific requirements. And then you'll also see with the workflows, we're really trying to leverage our areas of expertise within veterinary services to improve our consistency of this inspection and approval process. The last thing I have on here is the CAPS program. Some of you may be very, very well versed in CAPS. It is our aquaculture commodity staff. They are putting together our commercial aquaculture health program, comprehensive aquaculture health program standards, or CAPS. This is something they've been working on for several years. They're in the process of codifying it into our Code of Federal Regulations. And I just mention it here because it's not something that we can currently use to meet that APHIS oversight that we need for international exports, but it's definitely something that the aquatic trade team is working very closely with the aquatic commodity staff to make sure that as they're developing their CAPS program, it can be something that we can use to support APHIS oversight of exports in the future. All right, so here are the three primary objectives that we have for this RAEF 2.0 update. So the first one is meeting trading partners' requirements for APHIS oversight. So making sure that we're meeting the export requirements and that we're being consistent and compliant across the board. So whether that's with the export requirements, the statements themselves, the testing that has to be done, the process for endorsing certificates, etc. We also wanted to make sure that we were correcting any efficiency issues or any inefficiencies, including gaps that we had noticed or misunderstandings or questions that we had received with the previous version of RAEF. And then in addition, adding on an additional inspection type for our third-party facilities that are a little bit different in their process than a standard aquaculture farm. And so making sure that we had a system that worked well for those exporters as well. Our second objective was to really engage stakeholders. So we had, starting as far back as February of this year, we've had a series of informational sessions with both internal and external stakeholders. We've shared proposed drafts. At that time, we received a lot of great feedback, many of which from some of the names that I see here. So thank you for that. And now we are in the process of hosting our training. So doing trainings through both our internal stakeholders like today, as well as external stakeholders before we officially implement RAEF 2.0. And just for your awareness, I just mentioned a couple of our external stakeholders and internal stakeholder groups because there are really a lot of us that are involved in this process. So externally, obviously, the National Aquaculture Association, also our current RAEF facilities. There are USDA accredited veterinarians, our state animal health officials, our diagnostic labs that are doing aquatic export testing, and just our exporters and the general public. Internally, there are a bunch of groups within VS that are involved in this process, both our export VMOs at the FIOP vet level, our field veterinarians at the FIOP district level, our S&P aquatic trade team, and then also our import-export coordinators that are facilitating questions and in communications between FIOPs and aquatic trade. Our third objective was to update our resources. So you'll see that we've made some updates to inspection documents as well as the process for clarification and to streamline the overall inspection and approval process. We have also created a public website, and so this will go live probably in a couple of weeks. But you'll see that it will have step-by-step guides. We'll have all of our, publicly available inspection documents available on our website, and just creating more transparency of the overall process. We all know that even as we streamline this process of facility inspections, whether it's for aquaculture, whether it's for any other kind of facility, there's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of steps that we have to do. And so really helping to set expectations and provide, contact information and that kind of thing. And also answer some, initial questions that maybe we're getting from our external stakeholders that we can, head off and answer on the website so that we're not adding to our email as well. And then lastly is recording all of these trainings and making them available for later reference. They'll all be available to everyone here, everyone internally within VS. We'll probably post them on a SharePoint page, and I'll be sure to share that information with everybody. Okay, so what's our timeline for RAEF 2.0 looking like? So right now we're in these first two buckets. So we have the in-person small trainings, which are going on between July and September. Myself and Dr. Ted Williams, our import-export coordinator for live animals, we are going to 5 different regions within the U.S. To do small trainings. There's usually like somewhere between 4 to 5 participants that are current field veterinarians doing RAEF inspections now. So we wanted to target the first training at the people that are doing these, that have been doing these inspections and will continue to be doing these inspections. I also want to mention that in advance of those trainings, we're also having a virtual preparation meetings. And so I've been extending those invites to the regional export offices, vets offices, so that they can listen in and kind of hear how we're going through the paperwork and the pre-inspection packages for a given facility that they may be working with as well. We also have 3 virtual trainings. The first one is this one. As an overview today, we'll also be doing a similar overview that will be for our external stakeholders, which anyone is welcome to join. And then we'll be doing one specifically on the premises freedom evaluation package, specifically focusing on our accredited veterinarians, as well as open to anyone else that would like to join. We don't have an official effective date, but it's looking like it's going to be in September of 2023. I'll be sure to let everybody know once we finalize that date. But what that date means is that for any facilities that need to be inspected on that date in September or after, they will use the new RAEF 2.0 documents and processes. So just like when we did the last update to RAEF, it'll take about a year because all of our facilities are staggered throughout the calendar year for their inspections and approvals. So it'll take about a full year for everybody to be under RAEF 2.0. And lastly, I just want to mention we are planning a larger training that will be sometime next year in 2024. And this will be focused on will have the focus for our field personnel on conducting aquatic facility inspections in general. And part of that will include RAEF. So there will definitely be more details on that to come. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about the new process that we have. So this decision tree will be posted on our website. And it basically, the goal of it is to walk our facilities and our other stakeholders through the process of determining whether or not they need RAEF. We've seen a bit of a trend that some facilities, just because they export to a country, they want to add it to their RAEF approval. And while, in general, that's not a bad thing, it also is extra work for everybody. So we want to make sure that we're very clear about when is RAEF actually required and when can a facility just go ahead and export, without having to go through that process. So the first question that the facility will have to determine is whether or not they're exporting to countries that require RAEF. If the answer to that is no, then the second question they need to ask or determine is whether or not the destination country requires premises freedom for any or all of their testing requirements. So if no RAEF is required, to go to that country and no premises freedom testing is required, then no APHIS facility inspection is required. And that's what this red box is down here. If the facility is exporting to a country that doesn't require RAEF, but it does require premises freedom, or it allows for premises freedom, then the facility will need to be RAEF approved and go through the premises freedom verification process as well. We'll talk more about that in a second. Then on the other side of the decision tree, if the country they're going to or countries they're going to require RAEF, then they need to determine whether or not they are a RAEF production facility or a RAEF reboxing relabeling facility. The definitions for both of those are below. I know it's in small print. It's also on all of our inspection documents. It'll be on our website. But in general, most of our aquaculture facilities that we have been inspecting over the last couple of years are production facilities. So they're facilities that are breeding or producing or growing or packaging live aquatic animals on their premises intended for international export. Our reboxing relabeling facility type is that new kind of third party type that I mentioned a few minutes ago. So the purpose of this one is that they may not actually be raising the animals on their facility, but they're receiving those animals from suppliers that they're then reboxing, so changing the outer materials or relabeling the boxes prior to export. So, you know, sometimes we call them third-party facilities, sometimes we call them transshippers. Basically, they're facilities that are receiving animals. They're doing something with the outer packaging, and then they're continuing those animals on for international export. So the facility will determine what type of facility they are. And if they're a reboxing relabeling facility, there's a specific process for that. If they're a production facility, then the next question that they need to determine is whether or not they have to meet premises freedom for export. If they're going the premises freedom route, whether it's required by a given country or or it's allowed for a given country, then they'll need to go the production facility prem freedom route. We'll talk more in detail about what that looks like, but that's slightly different than if they're just a production facility doing either no testing or test and ship. So again, this is just an overview of that decision tree process. On our website, we'll also have step-by-step guides that kind of walk through each of these decisions and determinations for more information. Okay. So I also mentioned we have a new website. So this is just a screenshot of it. I hope that it will be going live in a couple of weeks. My goal is to have it go live before the actual rollout. But this will be a specific page that will be dedicated to live animal export resources focused on aquatic animals. So we'll have some of the disease sampling and testing information that we've had that's on the IREGs right now, as well as our VS Form 17141 health certificate. And then there will be separate pages specifically for RAEF that has step-by-step processes, these that decision tree, some of the flow charts that I'm going to show you, as well as direct links to a lot of our inspection documents. Okay, so I won't go into too much detail of this workflow because we'll go into the specific workflow for the different facility types in a second. But what I wanted to show you is that we have a workflow that is for some folks will be a little bit different, and it will also vary on the facility type. But in general, there are 5 steps to every RAEF inspection and approval. So once the facility is represented by the boxes that are white or no background, with the ones that are in blue are the export VMOs. Our field veterinarians are in red, and our aquatic trade staff are in purple. So as you can see, there's movement going on with various pieces and parts throughout this process amongst these 4 different groups. So once the facility determines their inspection type, the first step, no matter the facility type, will be to fill out those pre-inspection documents and to finalize those. Then once all of those pre-inspection documents are good to go, the second step will be the facility inspection. And then the third step will be an initial review of the inspection documents that happens at the local level by our export veterinarians. And then the fourth step is the final review, which happens at headquarters at our aquatic trade staff level. That will include updating the master spreadsheet. And then the last step is the approval letters. So this is the general flow that all of our packages and inspections and approvals will move through. We'll go through some of the nuances between the different facility types in just a minute, but I wanted to give you an idea of, this new process, as well as the fact that we do have these flows available, and they'll be on our website as well, not only for those of us that are working with these packages or getting questions about RAEF packages, but also for our external stakeholders so that they can see, and have a better idea of where is my package in this process and why does it take so long for me to get my package, and those kinds of things. Okay, so just some highlights. So we need these changes to RAEF 2.0 in order to meet the changing landscape that we're seeing in aquatic animal health, as well as our trading partner requirements for export. We have a whole series of trainings available, both in person and virtually, over the next month to year. And a lot of the changes that we've made have focused on streamlining our processes to determine if a facility even needs to be RAEF approved, making our resources and documents publicly available, putting together these workflows that are both meeting our program needs, but also leveraging our areas of expertise. And all right, with that, let's go and talk a little bit more in depth about our inspection type. Okay. So for RAEF, we have 3 different types or buckets. And whether the type of facility inspection that a facility will need will depend on that facility's business and market needs. So the first one here is the RAEF production facility just by itself. The second option is the RAEF production facility approval plus premises freedom. And the third option is the RAEF reboxing relabeling facility process. So we'll go through each of these in more detail. Okay, so for our RAEF production facility, again, this is a production facility, so it's an exporting facility that's breeding, producing, growing, packaging live aquatic animals on their premises. And they're going to countries that require RAEF approval, and they either require test and ship, or there's no testing required at all to go to that country. Basically, these are the RAEF production facility approval by itself is not going to meet Prem Freedom requirements. And that's why we have this second option, which is the production facility with the addition of needing to meet premises freedom for at least one pathogen to have access to that country. So this is premises freedom is required by the destination country, and then RAEF may be required, but it may also not be required. If you remember our decision tree, basically this is so that with premises freedom, APHIS needs to have more oversight of those facilities. And so we're going to make sure that the Prem Freedom evaluation is being done as part of the RAEF approval process. And the third type is our reboxing relabeling facilities. So again, these are facilities that are receiving animals from a source facility or a supplier. They're reboxing or changing the outer packaging or changing the label on the outside of the box or container prior to export. They're sending animals to countries that require RAEF approval, and there could be any level of testing required to that country, from no testing, test and ship, or premises freedom. Okay, so let's go into a little bit more detail about the RAEF production facility. So this is the workflow we saw earlier. We'll go a little bit more in detail into the steps. So in the top left-hand corner, you can see that the first part is the facility is going to determine what type of inspection they need. So we have those two questions that we talked about in the decision tree, which will also be on our website, which is the facility needs to determine, are they going to any countries that require RAEF approval, and or are they having to meet premises freedom to go to any of those countries? So let's say, this facility has decided, yes, we need to meet RAEF for, at least one of our markets. So we need to be RAEF approved, but we don't have to meet prem freedom. Then we'll follow just the RAEF production facility inspection flow, where either there's no testing or they can do test and ship. So the first step will be the facility filling out the pre-inspection documents. So there's a pre-inspection package that the facility is going to review, complete, and sign, which then they're going to submit to their local VS office. The VS office will be like the export office that is overseeing that region. The export VMO is going to receive that pre-inspection package. They're going to look over it, make sure it's complete. And if there's any questions, then the export VMO will be communicating directly via email with the facility to obtain any additional information and make any corrections. Then the export veterinarian is going to be completing part 1 of the inspection checklist, which is focused on documenting what are the export requirements to send this species to this country. Once the export VMO fills out that part 1 checklist and signs it, then they're going to send the inspection checklist and the pre-inspection package to the field veterinarian that is covering that region. Then we get to step 2. So the APHIS VS field veterinarian will contact the facility to schedule the inspection. So the inspection will occur, and then the field veterinarian will fill out part 2 of the inspection checklist, which is focused on the facility and things that need to be verified on site. The field veterinarian will then send that part 2 back to the export VMO, who will review part 2 of the inspection checklist, make sure, all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted and countersigned. The export VMO will then issue a draft approval letter. And then the export VMO will send all of these documents to the aquatic trade staff. So that includes the pre-inspection package from the facility, the inspection checklist, any additional documentation that's needed, which we'll specify in just a second, and the draft approval letter. The VS Aquatic Trade staff will review all of those documents. We save a copy of them. And as long as they're, complete and there's no questions, then the Aquatic Trade staff will update our internal RAEF master spreadsheet so that it's reflecting the correct countries and the correct species for that facility. We'll then communicate back to the export VMO and say, okay, everything's all good. The master spreadsheet's been updated. And then the export VMO will issue that official approval letter to the facility. So that's the workflow for a production facility inspection when there's no testing or it's test and ship. Now we'll go a little bit more into details of the actual documents. There are several documents because we have 3 different types of inspection. So I'm not going to go line by line through the documents, but I do want to show you certain sections of them just so that you can have an idea of what to expect. And then these will also be posted to our website or our SharePoint. All right, so I'm going to start off with our pre-inspection package. Okay, so this is the package that the facility will find on our website, and they will fill this out and then send it to the local export office. So the first page on all of these documents is just general information about what this particular document is for. In this case, it's for a production facility and the pre-inspection package. So there's some instructions here for the facility. And then there's the first part of this is a request for approval. So this is our way of gathering initial information from the facility, whether or not this is a new inspection, their company name, their approval number, their address, contact facility, the contact person or representative at the facility, information we need about the accredited veterinarian. And then there's a couple of statements that they need to certify. So one, that this approval that they're seeking is for a production facility approval, and that they're responsible for making sure that they're meeting all of the export requirements before sending any animals for export. That this approval, this request for approval will only be valid for the species in the countries that they're seeking approval for. So if they want to add additional countries or they want to add additional species to their current countries, then they need to contact us to go through that process as well. That, they are a representative of the facility, that they understand that if there's any changes in the management of the facility, that they will let us know in writing immediately. And that also that they understand that this is an annual inspection that has to be done every 365 days. So that's the first part of this request for inspection. Then the second part is focusing on what species and countries are they actually being seeking approval for. So for the production facility, there's 3 different options for how they submit this information. And it will depend on the number of species they're sending and what the testing requirements are. So there are 3 Excel workbooks, which will be posted on our website. And for one of them is specifically for Prem Freedom. We'll talk about that one in a second when we get to the Prem Freedom portion of that inspection type. The other 2 are focusing on the number of species. So if they're seeking approval to have RAEF approval to export 15 species or less, and there's no Prem Freedom testing, so there's either test and ship, eligible, or no testing, then they'll use this option 2 Excel workbook. If they're sending 16 species or more, and again, are either doing test and ship or there's no testing required, then they'll use the option 3. The difference between option 2 and option 3 is basically just the formatting, as you'll see, because it's once you start to get over a certain number of species, it makes it a bit cumbersome to use the formatting that we have for the Prem Freedom and the 15 species or less. So there's a slightly different format, which I'll show you in a second. So the facility is responsible for filling out one of these Excel workbooks that is meeting the species and testing needs of their facility. And then just basically making sure that they, understand that they are only going to be eligible to export the species that they've provided to the countries they've provided, and that, that they're authorized to be able to make these statements. So that's the facility will then submit the pre-inspection package, the Excel workbook, and any additional supporting documentation directly to the local VS office, which would be the export office. So that's the document part of the pre-inspection package. That's forms 1 and 2. I want to go into a little bit more on the Excel workbook just to show you those. All right, so this first one we're going to look at is for if they are doing test and ship or no testing for 15 species or less. And what you're going to see so there are 2 tabs to this spreadsheet. Every single Excel workbook, the first one that you have is an instructions and examples. This goes through how to complete each of the areas on the other tab. So there are 5 questions that the facility has to answer and provide this information. So the first one is, what country are they seeking approval for? What is the title of the health certificate being used? This is important because then we need that information when we're drafting the approval letter. What is the source of the health certificate? So if it's a link on the IREG, then they can put that link directly in there. Or if it's something where it's an import permit or other written documentation, they can indicate that information will be attached as part of the pre-inspection package. Step 3 is focusing on the common and scientific names that they're seeking approval for. Step 4 is whether or not any testing is required. And step 5 is, if testing is required, what pathogens do they have to meet test and ship for? So those are the 5 steps here. And under examples, like I mentioned, there's both instructions as well as examples or, more details for various scenarios. I'm not going to read through all of these, but it's important to take a look at these, especially if you're an export VMO and you're going to be advising a facility on how to complete these Excel workbooks, or if you're also an export VMO and you're reviewing these Excel workbooks to make sure they're completed correctly. If you're a field veterinarian, making sure that you understand how, the information that is provided on this and what it means and what you then may or may not need to verify during your on-site inspection. So after the examples, there are after the instructions and the details, we have some examples down here. So this is an example. One of the nice changes is that now if they're exporting a species to an EU member country, and it's just several EU member countries, and they all use the same health certificate and they all have the same testing requirements, they can put all of those on one row per species. So in this case, we have an example of clownfish going to Belgium and Germany. The second example is clownfish going to Germany and Spain. The main difference between these two is that Spain does often want a bilingual certificate, but the English requirements are the same, so they can go on the same line. And then the third example we have is clownfish and sending clownfish and koi to Mexico. So they're going on the same health certificate, but clownfish don't require any testing, whereas koi do. And so we indicate here for Mexico koi that testing is required, and then the pathogens of concern are epizootic ulcerative syndrome, spring viremia of carp, and koi herpes virus. So these are just 3 examples of how the facility would fill out this first tab. And if there are more scenarios or examples that would be helpful to have as we're going through this, we can always add those. So the facility will be responsible for filling out this workbook if they are going to countries that require either test and ship or no testing, and for 15 species or fewer to each country. So I'm just going to switch now to the one for 16 species or more. All right, so this is a similar layout in the sense that there's a tab for instructions and examples, but the primary difference is instead of having a row per country or country and species, there's a tab per country. And that's because for a lot of our ornamental facilities, they're sending hundreds to thousands of species to a given country. So basically, it's a very similar format in that you have the 5 steps. The first question being, what country are they going to, what health certificate, the source of the health certificate. Instead of listing all of the species under step 3, that's what this table down here is for. Then step 4 is there any testing required? And then if there is, then that's where step 5 comes into play, where that's an additional column in this table down here. So I'll show you some examples because I think it's a little bit easier to visualize that way. So on the instructions and examples tab, again, there are instructions here. These are specific to this spreadsheet. There's definitely some information that is consistent across all of the Excel workbooks, but there's also some that's particular to each one, like having a country-specific tab. So it's always the same 5 steps here. And then we have examples down below. So this first one is an example of sending these 17 ornamental fish to Belgium and Germany. They're using the same EU health certificate. This is the link to the certificate on the IREG. And none of these species require testing to these 2 EU member countries. So the answer is no. And then under pathogens for test and ship, we just put none or NA. The second example is sending those same 17 species, but now we're going to Germany and Spain. And often Spain wants to have a bilingual certificate, but the English requirements are the same. So they can, both of these EU member countries can go on the same, on the same country tab. There's no testing for any of these species for export, so the answer to step 4 is no, and we put none or NA under the pathogens for test and ship. Now, our third example is for Mexico. So this facility is sending 18 species, so it's the 17 species from before, the 17 species from before, but they're also sending koi. So we have Mexico, the title of the health certificate, the link to the health certificate on the IREG, and then the answer to whether or not the country requires any testing will be yes, because at least one species requires some kind of testing. So then you'll see under this table down here, we have the 17 species from before that don't require any testing to go to Mexico. But then we have koi down at the bottom, which has to meet, which has to have testing accompanied with the health certificate for epizootic ulcerative syndrome, spring viremia of carp, and koi herpes virus. So that's just how we would use this particular table when we have more than 16 species, and at least one of those species may have to meet some testing requirements to go to a given country. I think in general, a lot of our ornamental facilities that are approved for hundreds to thousands of species, they tend to shy away from sending one particular species that requires testing because it's just a lot of extra work on them. That's not, necessarily easy to do within their production system. But if they want to export that species, they're absolutely welcome to. They just need to make sure that they're doing the right testing for it, at least those few that require testing. All right, so this is the Excel workbook that the facility will use if they're sending 16 species or more to a given country, and that country either requires test and ship or no testing. Okay, so we've gone through the pre-inspection package now. We've talked about the actual form that needs to be completed, as well as the Excel workbook that the facility will complete for depending on the number of species and the type of testing. Once the facility has completed all of those pre-inspection documents, as we went through the workflow, then the export VMO will verify and start their part of the inspection checklist. So we'll go to the inspection checklist next. Okay, so similar to as I mentioned, for the pre-inspection package, the inspection checklist has some general information here on the first page. And the important thing I want to mention is that there's two parts to this. So part one is going to be completed and signed by the export veterinarian, and part one is focused on verifying that all of the information we received in those Excel workbooks and the pre-inspection package, that they have the right health certificate, that they've identified the right pathogens that need to be that require testing, that the facility doesn't have any prohibited species or something like that on their species list. So all of that documentation and country-specific verification will be done by the export VMO before the facility is even inspected. Once the export veterinarian finishes that part one and signs part one of the inspection checklist, then part two goes to the field veterinarian that they will complete during the on-site inspection. There's also information here about the 3 different workbooks that we talked about already, but it's here for the inspectors as well, for the export and the field veterinarian. Just talking about when to use which one. And then, so this is part one. So this is the part that's filled out by the export VMO. Basically, saying, did they receive the Excel workbook? Did they list the species? Do they indicate whether or not, did they use the right Excel workbook for the number of species and the type of testing that they need to meet for the countries they want to go to? Are there written requirements that we can verify? So if there's a health certificate on the IREG, that always makes it easy. But if not, did they provide written documentation demonstrating that these are the requirements to a given country? That could be an import permit. That could be information on another government's website, like we tend to see with Australia and New Zealand. Or that could be written email communication with a government official, things like that. Basically, something in an official capacity in writing that we can verify. These are the requirements to send a given species to a given country. Next question is making sure we have the common and scientific name for everything and that that's completed correctly. In some cases, some of our ornamental facilities will give you their inventory list, which is not the same as their species list. Yes, it may include all of the species that they want to be approved for, but we don't need to know if it's a small or a large or a male or a female. clownfish, and sometimes there's also like aquatic plants in there, or maybe there will be mollusks included, and it's just an ornamental fish certificate. So that there's instructions in the Excel workbooks for what acceptable descriptors will accept for their species list, as well as things that can't be included in there, like aquatic plants. And so, do we have a common scientific name? Did they provide written requirements for each destination country? And I know I'm going through these a little bit fast. I want to give you an idea of what's in the inspection checklist, but of course, as I mentioned, these will be available for you to go through on your own, and also, follow up with any questions. So the second section here, again, we're in the export VMO section, is, did they complete the country-specific requirements correctly? So wanting to make sure that the facility knows what health certificates they're supposed to use, that they have the right species, that they have the right testing, all of that kind of stuff. And, from my experience, I've seen that a lot of times facilities don't always have a good grasp of what actual diseases they have to test for to go to a specific country. And so this is an opportunity for us to really make sure we're clarifying that. And I think we tried to do that in the current version, or what will be the old version. But the way that the table was set up for testing was just not the most user friendly. So this is an alternative approach to that, which hopefully will make that process still clear of, what pathogens are they testing for to go to a given country, but without some of the cumbersomeness that the older version had. Then there's a section on if premises freedom is required. Do they have the right pathogens? Do they have a premises freedom letter? We'll talk more about that in a second. And then similarly, is test and ship required? And if so, do they have the right pathogens listed and things like that? And there's a space for additional comments, and then the export VMO will sign this part 1 of the checklist, and they will then send this part 1 as well as part 2 and the pre-inspection package to the field veterinarian in advance of their scheduling and conducting the site inspection. So here's part 2. This is where the field veterinarian is verifying the facility information. We have date of inspection, just some general information about if this is a new inspection, information about the facility, their name, their address, their RAEF approval number, contact facility information, whether or not the contact person was at the inspection, information about the accredited veterinarian, making sure that they're Category 2 accredited and also licensed to practice in the state where the facility is located, whether or not they were present during the inspection. The accredited vet doesn't have to be present during the inspection, but if they're not, and we want to make sure that we're verifying there's a valid veterinarian client-patient relationship between the facility and the accredited veterinarian. And then this next section is very similar to what's on the 2020 version of the checklist. Basically, this will be a fillable PDF. So you'll have checkboxes next to all of these options. But the directive is that you are basically trying to capture what is the facility doing. And just to give kind of a snapshot of the type of the facility, the type of processes, or, other protocols they have in place, etc. So getting an idea of where is the actual production facility or the holding sites located, what type of production type or system are they using, Did they provide a map so that you can get an idea of how animals are flowing throughout the facility, as well as how water is flowing throughout the facility? And then also how, where's the human traffic going? Are there restricted areas so that you don't have people just walking from one area of the farm to the other, especially if it's from lower health status to higher health status, that kind of thing. What is the estimated distance to the nearest open water? In some cases, it's very close. In some cases, it's states away. What type of water is the facility using? Where are they getting that water from? And how are they treating it? There are no wrong answers to these questions. It's really just so that we can capture, an essence of the facility and what they are doing. Also, for their shipping or transport water, are they using this water that's on the facility, or maybe do they have a dedicated source, and are they treating it? Then this question is, does the facility manage or treat the water leaving the facility? This is a part of the RAEF program. So they have to, every facility has to answer, meet yes for this question. But exactly how the facility meets that yes answer is variable. So in some cases, we have facilities that have to have state licenses in order to discharge. And that's an acceptable form of management. It doesn't mean that a facility necessarily has to be treating with chlorine or ozone or something like that. It just means that is there some sort of oversight of this discharge. In other cases, there's permits or permission that the facility gets at a state or regional level for having a retaining pond where they send their effluent and discharge. So there's various ways that the facility can meet this requirement, but it is a requirement of the RAEF program. And then whether or not they're reusing any of their water or effluent for non-RAEF purposes, like irrigating a nearby, plant agricultural pond, for example. Okay. Number 9 is focusing on animal health and movement. So making sure that that the facility, has or has recently had the species listed actually on their farm. In the case of some ornamental facilities, they may have a change of the species that they rotate out throughout their facility. But in general, we like to be able to have the animals that we're approving the facility to export to actually be on site. So that we can look at them, we can see how their various processes and protocols are in place around those animals, et cetera. We also want to know, where are they getting the animals from? Are they wild caught? Are they imported from an associated hatchery? Then, how is the facility organizing those animals so that they know, this group, and also for traceability, this group is this life stage, or maybe they organize by the date that the animals arrive on the facility, or, these are tanks 4 through 5 that, keep those numbers throughout whatever we just want to capture whatever they're doing. Again, there's no wrong answer. Then we want to make sure that the facility and the accredited veterinarian, which is 9D and 9E here, understand that they have to maintain the animal health and movement records for at least 3 years, and that they must be available to APHIS for review should we need to review them, either during the inspection or outside of the annual inspection. Then regarding their records, where are they maintaining those records? Have they had any non-negative or positive results in the past 12 months? In some cases, this may be they may have had a detection of a pathogen that doesn't impact their export status, but in some cases they may have one. And so they may not be eligible to go to certain countries if they've had a detection of a certain disease. So making sure that this doesn't necessarily preclude the facility from exporting, but we want to make sure that we're documenting if they have had a detection so that we can verify that it won't impact the export markets they want to go to. Are they tracking mortality and morbidity? And are they keeping records of that? Where are they keeping the records for tracking the movement of animals into and out of the facility? How are they tracking the import of animals into the facility? How are they tracking the export of animals out of the facility? And then we get to number 10 here. So then this is focused on biosecurity. So the requirement of RAEF is that the facility has a written biosecurity plan. And we want to see that addressing the 5 pathways for pathogen introduction, which is animals, water, feed, vectors, and fomites. There are some facilities that have this all in one document that they can just hand you, which is great. There are other facilities that maybe they have, some protocols over here for the animals, some protocols over here for, feed and vectors. That's okay too. We just want to make sure that they have something in writing that is addressing all of these 5 pathways. And then in addition to having something in writing, are they actually practicing those things, and are they actually training their employees to make sure that they're following those protocols to have good biosecurity? And then this last part, 10C, is focusing on, what are the various biosecurity practices the facility does have in place. And again, these will be a fillable PDF where you can just check all of the ones that apply. There's no wrong answers. These are just some areas that a lot of facilities have, or questions that are good to use if you've never been to the facility before, like, what kind of protocols do you have around your shipping